I think the MVNO model is a very interesting way of service delivery. Now, if we have a major incident and we want to guarantee service, it will be an interesting challenge for the MVNO, and potentially, if we're talking about the light or heavy MVNO solution, the added guarantees that a particular provider could help us ensure we've got availability of service to the capacity that we need. Could be a good way of separating different MVNO vendors. So working with the operator will be a key process. We have to ensure we've got security, we've got coverage, we've got capacity. From a agency perspective, I'm not sure if we should have policemen or firemen making those decisions. However, what we should do is specify what are our requirements and then make sure we've got independent validation that those requirements are being met.
How to guarantee reliability over an MTO model, this is quite difficult and it has to be proven because there are only few MVNO models around. TCCA has produced a paper on tendering commercial providers that also applies to MVNO and making their requirements for the contract. So if they agree to the contract as far as, for example, giving priority to PPDR is concerned, implementing preemption and so forth, there might be at least a certain degree of reliability on these networks, these MVNO-driven networks. However, for mission-critical communication, the majority of the current operators, at least in Europe, agree that it's not to be done by MVNO.
Public safety operations during emergency, resiliency and reliability, two of the key factors for operations. So let's take them one by one. Talking about resiliency. By definition, resiliency is saying that a network is available for service in an emergency situation or an incident scenario. So what that means is when a system goes down or service, there's implication to a component of the network itself, the service does not get impacted. One of the simplest ways of implementing that, or one of the most common ways of implementing that, is through redundancy. Redundancy can be built in at various layers in a solution. So, for example, if we take a backhaul solution, you have to have redundancy in equipment and redundancy in design. Building a redundant equipment set, say in a backhaul, as well as building a redundant design, which means that let's say some equipment failure happens. What happens to the link? Is there a resilient path for the eNode B or the base station to get to the core? Now, if you go up the list of equipment, if you go into the core, for example, just having a redundant equipment at one location may not be sufficient. During an incident or during an emergency, unfortunately in today's times, you can have destruction of property. What that means is you could actually have a complete location destroyed during an incident. What happens then? So geo-redundancy, which means having a whole another location that hosts this equipment to continue to provide service to the end customer is important. So an MVNO who wants to provide a resilient service during an emergency would have to take care of these factors, these types of factors. Now let's go to the second part, which is reliability. So by definition, again, reliability is guaranteed access, guaranteed service. And that becomes even more important in the case of an emergency scenario where there is an incident, which means there could be a congestion in the network. There could be a whole lot of people trying to access the same location. How do we guarantee that a public safety agency can have access to an MVNO network, which is also being shared by consumers at the same time? So building in access to the network, providing the quality of service once you're attached to the network itself. These are the type of facilities and features that an MVNO would have to provide. There are various ways of doing that. So having a dedicated spectrum, for example, for public safety users, as opposed to sharing the spectrum across all users, could be one way of doing that. Using all of the quality of service, preemption, access class barring type of features that 3GPP provides in order to build a service that provides prioritized access to the public safety agencies, or in some cases even preempts some of the consumer users in order to provide access to the public safety agencies. Now, one of the other things that we believe, at least at Motorola, is public safety agencies need more than what the standards provide in terms of prioritization. Prioritization can be based on certain factors, but when an incident happens, you don't necessarily have the highest priority user actually handling that incident. So how do we dynamically ensure that that one user, regardless of his rank, who is on the ground, gets access to the network? So there is these type of dynamic prioritization solutions that need to be provided by the MVNO. So these are the requirements we believe need to be provided for resilient and reliable access.
If we look at the way technology and our communication systems are evolving, we don't know what the future will look like, but what we can say is there will be a convergence of a lot of skill sets and services, and it will be a network society. So if we say, can a MVNO deliver a suitable service compared to a single supplier or network operator, it's an interesting conversation. I think given the complexity and the diversity, having a collaborative approach from a vendor perspective is probably where the future is going to lie. If we go down that path, of course, MVNO has got a key role to play in that journey. There's a lot of work to be done, so it would be very difficult to find one vendor which has got the expertise in all the things that we need from a public safety perspective. So I think the MVNO role is going to be a significant contributor in the future of the public safety communications.
I believe they can, as long as they're given enough resources and money to implement the right technologies, yes. And given also enough spectrum, yes. I think we are keen to do that and to serve the users and provide them with all they need for fulfilling their tasks.
So on an MVNO model, the way we're thinking about it and the way the industry is going, at least those who are adopting a hybrid model with an MVNO backbone, have both consumers, commercial consumers, as well as public safety users on it. So one of the key things would be, one of the key ways of providing the service to multiple types of users who require different types of service would be to have multiple tiers of service. So for example, a consumer who does not require any special treatment in terms of the packets that are going on the network could have a basic service offered to him, whereas a public safety user on the other end could have extremely high prioritized premium service offered to him, and that premium service guarantees access when he needs it, which is in the moments that matter, incident scenarios and emergencies, and it could have a higher quality of service, ensuring that the applications that are going over this network have the best performance that can be offered. So providing these multiple tiers of service would be one way of actually supporting both of these users. But then there are a few other factors that need to be supported. So for example, there's a huge difference in the types of applications a commercial consumer would use. I mean, the Facebook and Twitter type of applications may not necessarily be relevant for a public safety agency. They would be more custom built type of applications, which help with workforce collaboration or push-to-talk security applications. So the types of applications that need to be supported for both of these types of users would have to be provisioned in the network. Then the MVNO network would have to support this capability, either provide a dedicated application network for public safety agencies or allow the agencies to have their own application network connect to the network, to the MVNO network. And supporting both of these simultaneously by maybe partitioning the network is essential. The other thing that comes into play is security. A lot of the commercial consumers may not require the degree of encryption and security that public safety agencies require. So providing that differentiation side by side is important. Providing devices which are both commercial grade as well as ruggedized and highly secure for public safety agencies to be operated from the same network and to be able to be supported on that network, that would be essential. So these are some of the areas.
Private LTE networks sort of like the gold of public safety communications. We all wish we could have one. However, the commercial reality is we are a public service and the government has to invest in our particular capabilities. So we have to make the argument to government why they should invest in us. And unfortunately, a lot of governments don't have too much money at the moment. And public safety communication networks don't buy votes. However, building hospitals and schools do. So as far as money is concerned, you think where's the most public value we can obtain out of government investment? And I suggest it's probably in the hospitals and the schools as opposed to public safety communications. So the balance we need is probably not towards a dedicated LTE. Great if we could afford it, but we probably can't. The commercial network or commercial operators can certainly provide a service which is adequate for our needs, or the majority of our needs. And if we say, would you like something which meets 90% of what you need, as opposed to having nothing, I'd probably say, look, practically the 90% is good to have. The other concept is, it takes a long time to build an LTE network. If we go with a commercial carrier, the network's already there. So with just a bit of work, we can improve it to meet our requirements. However, to build one, we'll be years away from actually enjoying the benefits of an LTE service.
It certainly is not unnecessary, at least to have some part of your network in so-called private hands. That means, in that case, in the hands of the government, to be able to control it in real emergency situation. You might hand out other parts to private contractors, to private providers, but there will always be a certain part of the network that has to belong to private hands. If you have enough resources and if the political will is there, you might as well have a private network, implement a private network, because this is still the securest and safest way to conduct that kind of infrastructure.
If there is money and spectrum, a private network is probably the best option. Unfortunately, that's not the scenario everywhere. Now, before we go into whether a private network is essential or not, it's important to understand what are the requirements that we are trying to satisfy. So having coverage in every part of the country, for example, in a nationwide network, having coverage that provides a service in any part. Incidents don't choose a location, they can happen anywhere. How do you ensure that a public safety officer has coverage when he's in that location? So ubiquitous coverage is a mandatory requirement. Resiliency, reliability, availability, there is no compromise on that. Having a security built in at every layer of the network is extremely important to public safety consumers. Mission critical push to talk is a very important aspect of an application that a public safety consumer would continue to use in the next decade or so. The voice aspect of it doesn't go away. So all of these requirements, if they're satisfied by a commercial network in an MVNO model, then that would be the best option. Unfortunately, the economics of things and the business aspect of things may not allow all of these requirements to be satisfied by an MVNO model. And so it depends from agency to agency. If an agency's requirements are so stringent that they absolutely must have all of these requirements, then a private network is the best option. But if they can live with some of these, or they can fund some of these features to happen, or if the commercial operator funds some of these features to be built in, then an MVNO model is a better option. So.
If we look at the LTE environment currently, we're talking about the 4G networks. One of the issues that we're concerned about in Australia is that the commercial 4G networks are really designed around a large volume of downloads, not so much uploads. But from a public safety perspective, we're looking very much at the requirements where we need to upload a lot of data as well as download. So the commercial LTE networks may not be quite there yet as far as what we need. So in Australia, we're probably looking at, well, the government has outlined 2020 as the target date for the implementation of public safety mobile broadband. By 2020, 5G will be with us. So what we're led to believe is those issues about capacity will be resolved by the 5G network. So I think the 5G LTE system is definitely where, from an Australian perspective, we need to be looking at. The Australian Communications and Media Authority, the regulator, are doing some excellent work in trying to provide the policy environment to go down that path. But yeah, certainly by 2025, maybe 6G will be with us. Who knows about the development of quantum computing and quantum communications? We could be having a different conversation by then. But certainly for us, 5G will be, I think, a key part of the Australian LTE environment.
Well, I think at this point in time, too little facts are known about the development of 5G. So yes, they're talking about slicing the networks and providing sort of slices of the networks to people at points in time when it's needed and give it to other people when it's not needed. So that might change the MVNO landscape. But we haven't seen any of this in reality, and so for the PBDR, it's up to wait and see the further development of 5G and certainly the standardization.
I think 5G is going to bring a lot of changes. 5G is definitely the next step in the evolution of broadband data. So when we look at some of the key aspects of 5G that are being developed primarily for public safety agencies, it's mission critical push to talk and device to device proximity services. So these two features in general are very easily adaptable to the public safety users. But then there are all these other features that are actually being built in, which we believe can actually have a direct impact on public safety experience as well. So when we talk about the ultra high data rates that are going to be supported. So public safety applications are going to be real time as anything can get, be it voice, video, data, it doesn't matter. The instantaneous aspect of public safety agency, where a decision needs to be made in those seconds, in those fractions of seconds, requires extremely low latency, and low latency is one of the biggest aims or goals of 5G. So there is direct applicability to public safety networks in that way. Then there are various other features that are being looked at, for example, the MTC feature, the machine type communications. Wearables are going to be becoming more and more of the norm, even for public safety agencies, to monitor the health of an officer, to be able to send some data triggered by various activities on the person or surrounding the police officer, to be able to have all of this information transmitted in a very short manner. These are short data. So short data with low latency, which is a big feature of 5G, would be directly applicable to public safety agencies. So.